The Freemasons, the Illuminati, these are secretive organizations that many people suspect have extreme nefarious influence on society around the world. But they seem like small fries compared to the Bilderberg Group, an annual gathering of many of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the world to make plans regarding global issues. It's as if the group was created with the specific attempt of drawing the suspicion of conspiracy theorists. So who is this shifting group? What has officially been attributed to or blamed on them? Are they even something to worry about? Well, we'll see if we can find any answers from the available data. Number 10. The beginning. Just about every source on the Bilderberg meetings says that they began at the Hotel de Bilderberg in Oosterbeek in the Netherlands in 1954. Truth was that planning and organizing began in 1952, to some degree as a response to Greece and Turkey joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and making it clear to many of the elites of Europe that the fight against communism in the USSR and China needed a more coordinated effort. As such, reportedly, the first meeting was primarily centered on how to handle Germany's entry into NATO, which was such a fraught issue that it dragged on into the 1955 meeting. From the beginning, the conceit of the meetings was that there would be roughly 130 participants, and that roughly 2/3 of them would be Europeans, while the rest were North American. Usually, only roughly 1/3 of the participants are politicians, with the rest being business figures, members of academia, media personalities, etc. Presumably, they had little idea how much paranoia their first meeting would generate over the years. Number 9. Henry Kissinger. To many, one of the more sinister figures who has often attended Bilderberg Group meetings is this former US Secretary of State. He is known to have gone to meetings in the 1990s and every meeting from 2016 to 2019. Considering Kissinger's support for human rights violating military dictatorships in South America, such as Argentina's Jorge Videla or Chile's Pinochet, and his pushes to bomb civilians in Vietnam and Cambodia, it's understandable many would not want him in a position of such influence. Kissinger himself did very little to lessen the fears his involvement generated. For example, during the 1992 meeting, he reportedly said, "Today Americans would be outraged if UN troops entered Los Angeles to restore order. Tomorrow, they will be grateful." Given the notorious distrust many Americans have to the UN in general, to say nothing of pretty much every nation's resistance to regime change, and this seems like it was as deeply out of touch then as it is now. Number 8. Protestors. In relatively recent years, meetings by the Bilderberg Group have drawn angry people holding signs that say things like "Stop New World Order" or "Smash the Empire." Crowds for these protests have been known to get as large as hundreds of people. It's meant there have been some counterintuitive groups protesting together. For example, in 2012, both the far-right Tea Party movement and the far-left Occupy Wall Street movement were standing with 9/11 truthers. To date, there haven't been any reported instances of the protesters turning to violence, and armed protesters seem to be rare enough that in the aforementioned 2012 protest, only one was known to have brought a gun. By far, the highest-profile protesters of the Bilderberg meetings are Alex Jones and Jesse Ventura. Jones travelled to Bilderberg meetings, including to Hertfordshire in the UK in 2013. Jesse Ventura began in 2009 with an episode of the True TV programme Conspiracy Theory, wherein he alleged that the group was proposing plans to thin out the population through a combination of diseases and vaccine, while attempting to infiltrate the meeting. Considering that Conspiracy Theory ran for 2 more seasons after that episode, we can at least take comfort in knowing that they don't have the power of silencing just anyone they want. Number 7. Brexit. Attacks against the Bilderberg Group were given a real shot in the arm in 2016 when it was accused of pushing the Remain movement during the Brexit referendum. As early as March 14th, 3 months before the momentous referendum vote, Conservative MP Philip Hollobone stood before the House of Commons and claimed that the Bilderberg leaders would be ganging up against the British people. Members of the right-wing party UKIP had been publicly accusing Bilderberg of supporting pro-EU parties in Britain since 2013. It was given roughly the same amount of attention and criticism as President Barack Obama's official visit. The claim was given a bit of credibility by the fact that the Bilderberg website did claim that Brexit would be an agenda item for that year's meeting. On the other hand, the meeting wasn't until June 8th, only a fortnight before the referendum vote, and that the attendees were explicitly not bound by the conventions of their office or pre-agreed positions. It's hard to imagine what they could have done to sway the referendum vote the other way, even if they'd decided they had to. Number 6. Unlisted guests. On paper, the Bilderberg organizers seem remarkably open about admitting who their attendees are. It was well known that Bill Clinton went to a meeting in 1991 when he was still the governor of Arkansas, perfectly timed to reinforce the idea when he was elected president in 1992 that Bilderberg was a collection of kingmakers. That was only further reinforced when then obscure MP but later Prime Minister Tony Blair attended in 1993. Still, when a meeting is so informal, it means a lot can happen simultaneously above and below board. For the May 13, 2019 meeting, it drew a lot of attention that both Jared Kushner and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo were going to attend. Reportedly, Pompeo was attending primarily to try and sell the other attendees on supporting the US pressure campaign on Iran. It turned out that Pompeo wasn't actually invited to attend the event, though Kushner had been. While future trade deals would implicate that Pompeo was unsuccessful, some sources claimed that he wasn't even allowed in, it raises the distinct possibility that there were unannounced, maybe even not officially invited, attendees. Number 5. The 2010 leak. One claim often put forward by the Bilderberg group is that to keep the meeting more informal, there aren't official minutes taken. Presumably, the wealthy and powerful will be more willing to say what's really on their minds if there's not going to be a written record. But as came out in 2010, if that claim that there are no minutes taken is true, it didn't used to be the case. In October of that year, WikiLeaks released the supposedly non-existent minutes of the meetings from 1955 to 1958, as well as the 1960 meeting, 1963, and finally 1973. Beyond that, the 2013 book, edited by Roosevelt Institute senior researcher Giles Scott Smith and Valerie Orberg, Atlantic Euro-Atlantic or Europe-America, included citations of the 1966 Steering Committee minutes. While none of the published minutes name any names or contained shocking revelations that confirmed any conspiracy theories, they strongly indicated that Bilderberg meetings were more thoroughly documented than the public was led to believe. Number 4. One world government. As expected of an international organization of privately meeting powerful people, some of the protesters have accused Bilderberg of having the aim of establishing a one world government. Many end times Christians do not want that because the 17th chapter of the New Testament book, Revelation, supposedly says such a government will be a sign of the apocalypse. If there are any members or organizers of Bilderberg meetings that want to dispel their reputation, then in 2001, during an interview with the Guardian Labour MP and former Defence Secretary Lord Dennis Healey, cheerfully said about just the worst thing possible. While dishing on the various attendees from old meetings, such as claiming that Bill Clinton in 1991 was only there to glad hands and that nobody thought he would be the next president, Healey said, "To say we were striving for one world government is exaggerated, but not wholly unfair." He went on to talk about all the wars, poverty, etc. that international conflict generated. But there was no contesting that he provided a near-perfect pull quote for any conspiracy theory who wants to paint the meetings as having a devious globalist agenda. Number 3. Connection to the Third Reich. In addition to the one world government accusations, anti-Bilderberg people can point to the fact that one of the founders, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, joined the Nazi Party in 1933. In fact, he joined the infamous SS in 1934. Bernhard claims that he only did this to avoid some university tests, and that when he met Adolf Hitler in person, it was to renounce his German citizenship. Supposedly, when Bernhard was married in 1937, Hitler catally was the only head of state in Europe that didn't send him a wedding present. To Bernhard's credit, by the time World War II started, he'd abandoned his Nazi connections about as firmly as he could. In 1940, he led Dutch troops against the Wehrmacht, and when the Netherlands fell, he escaped with some of his troops to the UK. In 1942, he became a pilot with the Royal Air Force. His most notable missions included organizing food drops for starving Dutch citizens in what became known as Operation Manna, which would actually continue after the end of World War II as part of the Marshall Plan to rebuild Western Europe. He was also responsible for bombing V-1 launch sites. By 1944, he was leading all Dutch troops in the liberation of the Netherlands. He had the satisfaction of being present for the Third Reich surrender. So to say there's a strong Nazi connection to the Bilderberg group is just a little bit misleading. Number 2. The cancelled meeting. For all the protests and attempts at infiltration, there's only been one year when the Bilderberg meeting was cancelled. That year was 1976. To understand it, we have another entry devoted to Prince Bernhard. Since the end of World War II, he had such credits as helping to start the World Wildlife Fund in 1961, but by 1976 he was accused of making bad life choices again. In February 1976, arms contractor Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, which later merged into Lockheed Martin, admitted that it had bribed Bernhard $1.1 million to accept F-104G Starfighter jets into the Dutch Air Force. Bernhard would never be officially cleared of the bribe charge, and where exactly the money went would never be determined. But since 1976 was in the wake of America's disaffecting Vietnam conflict, the anti-war sentiment was strong enough in the country that none of the invited Americans were willing to attend the scandal-ridden monarch's meeting. By modern standards, it feels like a fairly quaint scandal to cancel a momentous meeting of captains of industry and monarchs. Number 1. Hosting headaches. As Lord Dennis Healey claimed while spilling the beans on the meetings, for the host country, Bilderberg isn't so much an honor as it is a headache. Even if those crowds of protesters haven't turned violent, just the cost of law enforcement to protect around 130 figures with worldwide influence is so costly that in 2013, the UK taxpayers had to shell out £1.3 million for a meeting near Waterford. That's to say nothing of the cost of renting out 5-star hotels for 4 days of meetings. On the bright side, the event is almost always corporate sponsored. Sponsors offered to compensate the UK taxpayers £500,000 of that 2013 bill. Also, while there are no attendance fees, every invitee is expected to cover their own travel and room costs. It could be argued that it's not reassuring to know that corporate sponsors are buying access to the rich and powerful, to such an extent that former Google CEO Eric Schmidt attended a meeting in 2019. It's also not reassuring how insistent Bilderberg is that the meetings aren't influential. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe. Brand new videos every day of the week. For more from me, why not check out another video I do called Biographics. We do biographies of notable people from history. I'm going to link to that below. Please do check it out. And thank you for watching.